7 years of silence can break a man or build him into something harder. Colton Hayes had chosen hard. He'd survived by keeping every living soul at arm's length, behind fences and cold stares and a voice he'd almost forgotten how to use. Then Mara Vance arrived with a daughter who didn't know the meaning of boundaries, a wagon full of broken dreams and eyes that refused to look away when he wanted them to. The town expected her to fail. Colton expected to stay uninvolved. Neither of them expected the 5-year-old girl who would crack them both wide open. This is the story of 3 people learning that survival isn't the same as living, and that sometimes the hardest walls to tear down are the ones we build around ourselves. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it pulls you in, hit that like button. Let's begin. The fence post splintered under Colton's hammer with a crack sharp enough to scare birds from the cottonwood. He didn't look up, didn't care. Just pulled another nail from between his teeth and drove it home with 3 solid strikes. The rhythm kept him steady, had for 7 years now. Work the land, fix what broke, speak to no one, repeat until the sun set and exhaustion made sleep possible. He'd gotten good at it. Behind him, his ranch stretched out in shades of dust and dried grass, orderly as a man could make nature behave. Barn doors hung straight, fences held, animals stayed where they belonged. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he'd earned every quiet acre of it by keeping his head down and his mouth shut. The sound of wagon wheels grinding over the dirt road made him pause mid-swing. Colton turned his head just enough to see the rattling mess of wood and canvas coming up the lane that bordered his property. The wagon listed to one side like it was drunk. A thin woman sat up front, reins loose in her hands, shoulders locked tight with the kind of tension that came from holding too much together for too long. Next to her, a small girl bounced on the bench, braids flying, pointing at everything like the world was brand new. They were heading for the old Pritchard place. Colton's jaw tightened. Nobody had lived there in 3 years. Last family gave up after one hard winter and a summer that burned their crops to stubble. The house sagged. The barn had a hole in the roof big enough to see stars through. The well was questionable at best. It wasn't a homestead anymore. It was a warning. The wagon lurched to a stop in front of the property, and the woman climbed down slow, like her bones hurt. The girl scrambled after her, landing in the dirt with a laugh that carried clear across the open space between their land and his. Colton looked away. Not his business. He turned back to the fence and swung the hammer again. The post shuddered, held. He moved to the next one. "Mama, look, horses." The girl's voice shot across the distance, bright and unfiltered. Colton didn't look up, but he felt her attention land on him like a weight. "Lila, stay close," the woman called, her voice firm but tired. "We've got work to do." "Can I go say hi?" "No." "But Mama." "I said no." Silence. Then the sound of small feet kicking at dirt. Colton exhaled through his nose and kept hammering. Chut-chut. By the time the sun started its descent, Colton had replaced 4 posts and restrung half the north pasture fence. His shirt stuck to his back, and his hands ached in that good familiar way that meant he'd done something tangible, something real. He gathered his tools and headed for the barn, glancing once, just once, toward the Pritchard place. The woman was on the porch, bent over a crate, pulling out what looked like mismatched dishes. The girl sat on the steps, chin in her hands, watching her mother with the patience of someone who'd learned early that complaining didn't change anything. Colton looked away again. Still not his business. 3 days passed. Colton saw them in glimpses. The woman hauling water from the well in buckets that looked too heavy. The girl chasing a chicken that had gotten loose, laughing even when it outran her. The wagon sitting in the yard still half loaded, like they hadn't decided yet if they were staying or just pausing. He didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge their existence beyond the fact that they were there, making noise where there used to be silence. On the 4th day, the girl showed up at his fence. Colton was checking the gate latch when he saw her, small, maybe 5 years old, standing on the other side of the rails with her hands wrapped around the top bar. She wore a dress that had been patched in 3 places and boots that didn't quite fit. Her hair hung in 2 messy braids, and her face was streaked with dirt. She stared at him. He stared back. "You got a lot of horses," she said. Colton said nothing. "We don't got any yet. Mama says maybe later if we can afford it. But I like yours." That one's real pretty. She pointed at the bay mare grazing near the fence line. What's her name? Colton turned and walked toward the barn. Hey, I asked you a question. He kept walking. That's rude. He disappeared into the barn and didn't come out until he heard her footsteps retreating. Mara Vance knew people were watching. She felt it every time she went into town for supplies. The way conversations paused when she walked into the general store, the way eyes followed her down the street, the way the clerk's smile never quite reached his eyes when he tallied her bill. She didn't blame them. A woman alone with a child, no husband, no family, moving on to a failed homestead with nothing but a wagon and grit. It didn't exactly inspire confidence, but she didn't need their confidence. She just needed them to leave her alone long enough to prove she could do this. Mama, the fence is falling down again. Mara looked up from the stove where she was trying to coax a weak flame into something useful. Lila stood in the doorway, pointing toward the back of the property. Which part? The part by the mean man's land. Mara sighed. He's not mean, Lila. He's just private. He wouldn't tell me his horse's name. Maybe he didn't hear you. He heard me. He just didn't care. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. Sure enough, a section of their fence, if it could even be called that, had given up entirely, rails sagging into the dirt like broken bones. She closed her eyes. One more thing. Always one more thing. Can you fix it? Lila asked. I'll try. What if you can't? Then we'll figure something else out. Lila nodded, satisfied, and ran off to chase the chickens again. Mara walked to the fence and crouched down, running her hands over the splintered wood. It was rotted through in places, dried out, and brittle in others. She didn't have the money for new rails, didn't have the tools to do it right even if she did. She heard footsteps and looked up. Colton Hayes stood on the other side of the property line, maybe 10 feet away, a coil of rope in one hand. He wasn't looking at her, just standing there, still as stone, like he'd been passing by and gotten stuck mid-step. Mara straightened. Afternoon. He didn't respond. She waited a beat, then turned back to the fence. Your rails are shot, he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, like he'd dragged it up from somewhere deep. Mara glanced at him. I noticed. Won't hold anything. Animals will walk right through. I know. Silence. You got replacements? He asked. Not yet. You planning to get some? When I can. He nodded once, slow, then turned and walked back toward his barn. Mara watched him go, something tight and frustrated coiling in her chest. She didn't need his commentary, didn't need his judgment. She knew the fence was bad, knew the barn was worse, knew the whole place was a disaster. She was doing the best she could.
Boss, please.
That night, Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, playing with a wooden horse Mara had carved for her months ago. It was lopsided and rough, but Lila loved it fiercely. Mama? Why doesn't the man next door talk? Mara glanced up from the pot she was scrubbing. I don't know, sweetheart. Some people just don't. Is he sad? Mara paused. Maybe. Do you think he's lonely? Lila said, I think he's lonely. He looks lonely. Mara set the pot down and crossed to where Lila sat, crouching beside her. People are complicated, baby. Sometimes they want to be left alone, and we have to respect that. But what if they don't really want to be alone? What if they just think they do? Mara smiled despite herself. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't listen. Mara laughed and pulled her daughter into a hug. Go to bed. Can I visit the horses tomorrow? We'll see. That means no. That means we'll see. Lila groaned and trudged toward the corner where they'd set up her bedroll. Mara watched her go, then turned back to the dishes, scrubbing harder than she needed to. 2 weeks in, and Mara had managed to patch the roof, fix the stove, and get 3 chickens to actually stay in the coop. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The fence, though. The fence was still a problem. She'd tried propping the fallen rails back up with rocks and spare wood, but it didn't hold. Every morning, she'd wake to find them sagging again, and twice now, the chickens had wandered onto Colton's property. The first time, she'd found them pecking around his barn and had to chase them back herself, mortified. The second time, they were already in the coop when she went looking, returned without explanation, gate latched behind them. She didn't see Colton, didn't hear him, but she knew. "Why do you think he helped?" Lila asked one evening, watching the chickens from the porch. "I don't know. Maybe he's not as mean as he acts." "Maybe. Or maybe he just doesn't want our chickens on his land." Mara smiled. "That's more likely." The night the mayor went into distress, Colton was already awake. He'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when he heard the sound, low and wrong, a groaning whinny that didn't belong to the night. He was on his feet and out the door in seconds, boots barely laced, shirt unbuttoned. The mare was down in the pasture, sides heaving, eyes rolling white. Colton's stomach dropped. He'd seen this before, knew what it meant. Colic, maybe, or something worse. Either way, she needed help, and she needed it now. He moved fast, grabbing the medkit from the barn, his hands already working through the steps he'd have to take. But when he reached her, he realized it wasn't going to be enough. Not alone. He looked toward the Pritchard place. No. He could do this. He'd done it before. The mare screamed, a sound that tore through the night, and Colton made his decision. He ran. Mara was asleep when the pounding started. 3 sharp knocks, hard enough to rattle the doorframe. She jerked upright, heart racing, and grabbed the rifle she kept near the bed. Lila stirred but didn't wake. Mara crept to the door. "Who's there?" "It's Hayes." She froze. "I need help. Now." His voice was clipped, urgent, nothing like the slow drawl she'd heard before. Mara opened the door. Colton stood on the porch, hair wild, shirt hanging open, breathing hard. "My mare! She's in trouble. I need another pair of hands." Mara didn't hesitate. "Lila, stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me." "Mama?" "I mean it." She grabbed her boots and followed Colton into the night. The mare was still down when they reached her, but her breathing had steadied slightly. Colton dropped to his knees beside her, hands already moving over her belly, checking for blockages, for swelling, for anything that would tell him what was wrong. "What do you need me to do?" Mara asked. "Hold her head. Keep her calm." Mara knelt in the dirt and placed her hands on the mare's neck, murmuring low and steady. The horse's eyes rolled toward her, wild and afraid. "You're okay," Mara whispered. "We've got you." Colton worked in silence, his hands sure and methodical, despite the tension radiating off him. He checked her vitals, massaged her belly, administered something from a small vial. Minutes stretched. The mare groaned. "Come on," Colton muttered. "Come on." And then slowly, the mare's breathing evened out. The tension in her body eased. She shifted, tried to rise. "Easy," Colton said, his voice firm. "Not yet." They waited. Finally, the mare stood, shaky but upright, and Colton let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for hours. Mara sat back on her heels, her hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. "Thank you," Colton said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. "You're welcome." They stayed there for a while, neither of them speaking, just breathing in the cool night air and the scent of grass and sweat and survival. "You know horses," Colton said eventually. "A little. My father had a ranch, long time ago." Colton nodded, didn't ask more. Mara stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I should get back to Lila." "Yeah." She started to walk away, then paused. "If you ever need help again, I won't." The words were quick, sharp, and Mara felt them like a door slamming shut. She nodded once and walked back toward her house, the night settling cold and quiet around her. Behind her, Colton stayed with the mare, one hand resting on her neck, his expression unreadable in the dark. The next morning, Lila was up early, bouncing with questions. "Where did you go? Was it an adventure? Did someone get hurt? Did you save someone?" Mara poured water into the basin and splashed her face. "Mr. Hayes needed help with one of his horses." "The mean man?" "He's not mean." "Did you talk to him?" "A little." "What did he say?" Mara hesitated. "Not much." Lila frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the lack of drama, then ran outside to check on the chickens. Mara stood at the window, watching her daughter chase them around the yard, and thought about the way Colton's hands had moved over the mare, confident, gentle, sure. The way his voice had cracked just slightly when he'd said thank you. He wasn't mean, he was something else entirely. She just wasn't sure what yet. Over the following days, Mara caught glimpses of Colton more often. Not because he sought her out. He didn't. But because she was looking. She saw him mending fences with the same methodical precision he'd used on the mare. Saw him working his horses in the round pen, his movements economical and quiet. Saw him standing at the edge of his property, at dusk, hands in his pockets, staring out at nothing. He never waved, never acknowledged her. But twice now, she'd found things near her fence line. A stack of rails that hadn't been there the night before, placed just close enough to her property that it could have been an accident. A bucket with a broken handle, repaired and set beside her well. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. Leela, however, had no such reservations. "I'm going to go say hi to the horses," she announced one afternoon. "Lila." But the girl was already gone, sprinting across the yard toward Colton's fence. Mara sighed and followed, fully intending to drag her daughter back before she made a nuisance of herself. By the time she reached the fence, Lila was already talking. "And Mama says you got the prettiest horses in the whole territory, and I think she's right, but I don't know because I haven't seen all the horses, so maybe there's prettier ones somewhere else, but I don't think so. Do you?" Colton stood a few feet away, hammer in hand, staring at Lila like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He didn't answer. "What's this one's name?" Lila pointed at the bay mare. "The same one from the other night." Silence. Lila tilted her head. "You really don't talk much, do you?" "Lila," Mara called, exasperated. "Leave him alone. I'm not bothering him. I'm just asking questions." "You're bothering him." Colton's gaze flicked to Mara, just for a second, and something unreadable passed across his face. "Her name's Ember," he said. Lila's entire face lit up. "Ember, that's a good name. Does she like apples?" "Sometimes." "Can I give her one?" Colton hesitated, then nodded once. Lila squealed and ran back toward the house, leaving Mara standing awkwardly at the fence with a man who clearly didn't want her there. "I'm sorry," Mara said. "She's persistent. She's fine. She asks a lot of questions." "Kids do." Mara blinked. It was the longest exchange they'd had that didn't involve a dying horse. Lila returned, breathless, clutching a half-bruised apple. Colton opened the gate, just wide enough for her to slip through, and led her to the mare. "Hold it flat," he said. "Fingers together." Lila did as she was told, eyes wide as Ember's soft nose brushed her palm and took the apple with a gentle crunch. "She likes me," Lila whispered. Colton almost smiled. Mara saw it. Just a flicker at the corner of his mouth, gone before it fully formed. And for the first time since they'd arrived, she thought maybe, just maybe, the fence between them wasn't as solid as it looked. That evening, Mara sat on her porch, watching the sun sink below the hills. Leela was inside, already asleep, worn out from a day spent talking Colton's ear off. Mara smiled despite herself. She thought about the way he'd opened the gate, the way he'd shown Lila how to feed the horse, the way his voice had softened, just barely, when he spoke to her daughter. He wasn't mean, he was careful, and Mara understood careful. She'd spent the last 5 years being careful herself, keeping her head down, her walls up, her daughter close. She knew what it cost, knew what it protected, but she also knew what it kept out. She looked across the yard toward the fence that separated their land and wondered what Colton Hayes had built his walls to keep out, and whether maybe he was starting to wonder the same thing. The apple became a routine. Every afternoon, around the same time the sun started its slow descent, Lila would appear at Colton's fence with whatever she could find. A bruised apple, a carrot, once a biscuit that Ember sniffed and rejected outright. Colton never told her to stop coming, never encouraged it either. But the gate was always unlatched when she arrived, and he was always somewhere nearby, close enough to watch but far enough to pretend he wasn't. Mara let it happen. Partly because Lila was relentless and arguing with her was like trying to redirect a flash flood with a teaspoon. Partly because she'd seen the way Colton's shoulders loosened just slightly when her daughter chattered at him, the way his hands gentled when he corrected Lila's grip on the brush she'd insisted on using to groom Ember. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, But he didn't send her away either, and for a man who'd spent 7 years keeping the world at arm's length, that felt like something. Still, Mara kept her distance. She had her own battles to fight, and most of them were losing propositions. The fence was still a disaster. The barn roof leaked in 3 new places every time it rained. The chickens had stopped laying, probably out of spite. And the vegetable garden she'd tried to start had produced exactly 4 stunted carrots and a tomato plant that looked like it was dying just to make a point. Money was tight, tighter than tight. She'd sold nearly everything she owned to get them here, and what little she had left was disappearing faster than she could replenish it. The general store clerk had started giving her that look. The one that said he knew she was running on fumes, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could extend credit to someone with no husband, no family, and no visible means of keeping herself afloat. She didn't blame him. She wasn't sure either. "Mama, the roof's dripping again." Mara looked up from the stove where she was trying to stretch yesterday's beans into something that resembled a meal. Sure enough, water was dripping through a new crack in the ceiling, landing in a steady rhythm on the floor. She grabbed a pot and shoved it under the leak. "I'll patch it tomorrow." "You said that yesterday." "And I'll say it again tomorrow if I have to." Lila frowned but didn't argue. She'd learned early that some things couldn't be fixed with questions. Mara stirred the beans, her jaw tight, her mind already running through the list of things she couldn't afford to fix and the even longer list of things she couldn't afford to ignore. The well needed work. The stove was on its last legs. The wagon had a wheel that wobbled so badly she was half convinced it was going to fall off mid-trip one of these days, and winter was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way the wind had started to bite, in the way the grass had gone from gold to brown. They had maybe 2 months before the first snow, and she still didn't have enough firewood, didn't have enough food stored, didn't have enough anything. She closed her eyes and gripped the edge of the stove. One thing at a time. That's all she could do. One thing at a time. "Mama?" "What, baby?" "Can I go see Ember?" Mara glanced out the window. The sun was still up, the sky clear. "Stay where I can see you." "I will." Lila was out the door before Mara could add anything else. Mara watched her run across the yard, braids flying, and felt something twist in her chest. Lila deserved better than this. Deserved a home that didn't leak, food that wasn't stretched thin, a mother who wasn't constantly one disaster away from falling apart. But this was what Mara had, and she'd be damned if she let it break her. She turned back to the stove and kept stirring. Colton was fixing a bridle when Lila showed up. He heard her before he saw her. The sound of small feet kicking up dust, the hum of a tune he didn't recognize. "Hi, Mr. Hayes." He didn't look up. "Lila." "Guess what?" "What?" "Mama says I can stay as long as I want today because she's fixing the roof again, and she doesn't want me underfoot, so I can help you." Colton's hands paused on the leather. "I don't need help." "Everybody needs help sometimes. That's what Mama says." "Your mama talks a lot." "Yeah, but she's smart, so it's okay." Colton glanced at her. Lila stood with her hands on her hips, grinning like she'd just won an argument he hadn't realized they were having. He went back to the bridle. "You can sit on the fence. Don't touch anything." "Can I brush Ember?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I said so." Lila huffed, but climbed onto the fence anyway, swinging her legs and watching him work with the kind of unblinking focus that made Colton uncomfortable. Kids didn't usually stare at him. Most people didn't. He'd spent years perfecting the kind of presence that made folks look away, cross the street, find somewhere else to be. Lila didn't seem to have gotten the message. "Why don't you talk to people?" she asked. "I'm talking to you." "That's not what I mean. Mama says you don't go to town, don't go to church, don't go anywhere. Why?" "None of your business." "That's rude." "So's asking questions that aren't yours to ask." Lila considered this. "Mama says people who are mean are usually just sad." Colton's jaw tightened. "I'm not mean." "I know. That's why I think you're sad." He set the bridle down harder than he meant to and turned to face her. "You want to brush the horse or not?" Lila's face lit up. "Really?" "Get the brush from the barn. Blue handle. Don't touch anything else." She was gone in a flash, and Colton let out a slow breath. Sad. He wasn't sad. He was careful. There was a difference. Lila returned with the brush, slightly out of breath, and Colton showed her how to work with the grain of Ember's coat, how to be gentle around her legs, how to watch for signs that the horse was getting annoyed. "She's so pretty," Lila whispered, running the brush along Ember's side with the kind of reverence most people reserve for things they couldn't have. "She's a good horse," Colton said. "Do you love her?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Do you love her? Ember, do you love her?" Colton frowned. "She's a horse. So, you can still love her." "I take care of her. That's enough." Lila shook her head, serious as a judge. Taking care of someone and loving them aren't the same thing. Colton stared at her. She couldn't have been more than 5, maybe 6, and here she was talking like someone who'd lived 3 lifetimes. "Who told you that?" he asked. "Nobody. I just know." She went back to brushing, humming that same tune from earlier, and Colton turned away before she could see the look on his face. Oops. That night, Mara was up on the roof with a bucket of tar and a prayer. The patch she'd done last week had already given out, and now she was trying to seal it again before the next rain turned her house into a swimming hole. The work was slow, tedious, and her hands were black with tar by the time she finished. She climbed down carefully, her legs shaking from the effort, and nearly tripped over the bucket at the bottom. "Easy." She spun around. Colton stood a few feet away, holding the bucket steady. Mara's heart was still pounding. "You startled me." "Didn't mean to." She wiped her hands on her apron, smearing tar across the fabric. "What are you doing here?" "Saw you on the roof. Thought you might fall." "I didn't." "I can see that." They stood there as the growing dark, neither of them moving, and Mara felt the weight of his presence like something solid. He was close enough that she could see the line of his shoulders, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure he wanted to say. "Your roof's in bad shape," he said finally. "I know. Tar's not going to hold it." "It'll hold long enough." "Long enough for what?" Mara's temper flared, sharp and sudden. "Long enough for me to figure out what comes next. That good enough for you?" Colton's expression didn't change. "Didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and Mara felt something shift in the space between them. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something underneath. Something that looked almost like understanding. "I've got extra shingles in my barn," he said quietly, "left over from last year. You can have them." Mara blinked. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." "Then why?" "Because you need them. And I don't." He turned and walked back toward his property before she could respond, leaving her standing in the yard with tar-stained hands and a throat that felt too tight to speak. The shingles appeared 2 days later, stacked neatly beside her barn. No note, no explanation, just the materials and the silent understanding that she was expected to figure out the rest on her own. Mara ran her hand over the wood, checking for rot, for damage, for any sign that this was charity she couldn't afford to accept. But the shingles were good, solid, more than she needed even. She looked toward Colton's land, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Did Mr. Hayes bring those?" Lila asked, appearing at her elbow. "Seems like it." "That was nice." "Yeah, it was. Are you going to say thank you?" Mara smiled despite herself. "Eventually." "Mama." "What?" "You're bad at saying thank you." "I know, baby." The next time Mara saw Colton, it was in town. She'd gone in for supplies, the bare minimum stretched as far as her dwindling funds would allow, and was loading the wagon when she spotted him outside the feed store. He was talking to the store owner, or rather, the store owner was talking at him, while Colton stood with his arms crossed, face blank, nodding occasionally in a way that made it clear he wasn't really listening. Mara almost didn't approach, almost kept her head down and finished loading the wagon and left without saying anything. But the shingles were still sitting beside her barn, and she owed him more than silence. She crossed the street. Colton saw her coming and went still, like a deer that had just caught wind of a hunter. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Mrs. Vance?" The store owner looked between them, clearly curious, then excused himself with a tip of his hat. Mara waited until he was gone. "I wanted to thank you for the shingles." Colton nodded once. "You get them on yet?" "Not yet. Soon." "Don't wait too long. Weather's turning." "I know." Silence settled between them, awkward and heavy. Mara shifted her weight, unsure what else to say. Colton stared past her toward the horizon, like he was already planning his escape. Lila won't stop talking about your horses, Mara said finally. She talks a lot. Yeah, she does. Doesn't bother me. Mara glanced at him, surprised. Really? Kid's got questions. Nothing wrong with that. Most people find her exhausting. Most people don't listen. The words hit Mara harder than they should have. She looked at Colton, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that she hadn't expected. Not pity, not judgment, just, honesty. Well, she said quietly, thank you for listening to her and for the shingles. Colton met her eyes just for a second and nodded. Then he turned and walked away, and Mara was left standing in the middle of the street, feeling like she'd just been handed something she didn't know how to hold. Winter arrived early and mean. The first snow came in October, a full month ahead of schedule, and it didn't stop. The sky turned gray and stayed that way, and the wind cut through the valley like a knife. Mara's house, already struggling, groaned under the weight of it. She got the shingles on just in time, working through frozen fingers and aching muscles, and the roof held. Barely. The walls were another problem. Cold seeped through the cracks, and no amount of stuffing rags into the gaps seemed to help. Lila started sleeping in Mara's bed, curled against her mother for warmth, and Mara lay awake most nights listening to the wind howl and wondering how much longer they could last. The chickens stopped laying entirely. The vegetable garden was buried, and the money Mara had been rationing so carefully ran out 2 weeks into November. She sat at the table one morning, staring at the empty coin purse, and felt the walls close in. Mama, Mara looked up. Lila stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale. What is it, baby? I'm cold. I know. Come here. Lila climbed into her lap, and Mara wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tight. She could feel Lila shivering, could hear the chatter of her teeth, and something inside Mara cracked. This wasn't sustainable. She'd known it for weeks, but she'd been too stubborn to admit it. Too proud. Too determined to prove she could do this on her own. But she couldn't, not anymore. Lila, she said quietly, I need you to stay inside today. Keep the fire going. Don't go outside for anything. Understand? Where are you going? Town. I'll be back by dark. Can I come? Not this time. Lila frowned but didn't argue. Mara kissed the top of her head, bundled herself in every layer she owned, and headed for the wagon. Out done. The general store clerk looked up when she walked in, and Mara saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, saw the way his smile thinned. Mrs. Vance, what can I do for you? I need credit, Mara said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. Just enough to get through the winter. I'll pay you back in the spring. The clerk sighed. Ma'am, I've already extended you more than I should. I know, and I'm asking for more. I can't do that. Why not? Because I don't know if you'll be here in the spring. The words hung in the air, blunt and brutal, and Mara felt her face go hot. I'll be here, she said. With all due respect, ma'am, a lot of folks have said that. Most of them were gone by Christmas. I'm not most folks. Maybe not. But I can't take that chance. Mara's jaw clenched. What if I had collateral? What kind of collateral? She thought fast, her mind racing through the list of things she owned. The wagon, the chickens, the few pieces of furniture she'd brought with her. None of it was worth enough. I'll figure something out, she said, her voice tight. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked out before he could say anything else, her chest burning, her vision blurred. She'd known it was a long shot. Known the answer before she'd even asked. But hearing it out loud, hearing that he didn't think she'd make it, felt like a punch to the gut. She climbed onto the wagon, gripped the reins, and sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then she heard her name. Mrs. Vance? Mara turned. Colton stood beside the wagon, his coat dusted with snow, his expression unreadable. I heard, he said. Mara's throat tightened. It's fine. Doesn't sound fine. It's none of your business. Maybe not. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bill, holding it out to her. Mara stared at it. I can't take that. You need it. I don't take charity. It's not charity. It's a loan. I can't pay you back. Didn't ask you to. Mara's hands clenched on the reins. Why are you doing this? Colton looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his face, something that looked almost like recognition. Because I know what it's like, he said quietly, to be one bad day away from losing everything. And I know what it's like when nobody helps. Mara's vision blurred, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I'll pay you back, she said, her voice rough. I know. She took the money, her hands shaking, and Colton stepped back. Get home before the snow gets worse, he said. Then he turned and walked away, and Mara sat there in the cold, clutching the bill like a lifeline, and let herself cry. That night, Lila was already asleep when Mara finally made it back. She stoked the fire, added the supplies she'd bought with Colton's money, and sat at the table with her head in her hands. She'd survived. Again. Barely. But surviving wasn't the same as living, and she was starting to wonder if she'd ever figure out the difference. Outside, the snow kept falling, and across the yard, a single light burned in Colton's window. Mara looked at it for a long time, then pulled her blanket tighter and closed her eyes. The days that followed were hard but manageable. Mara rationed the supplies carefully, kept the fire low, and did everything she could to stretch what little they had. Lila complained less than she should have, and Mara loved her fiercely for it. Colton kept his distance, but his presence was there in small ways. Firewood that appeared beside her door, a sack of grain left near the chicken coop. Once, a rabbit already cleaned and ready to cook, hanging from a nail on her porch. Mara never saw him leave these things, never caught him in the act. But she knew, and she didn't know how to feel about it. Grateful, yes, but also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like dependence, and Mara had spent too many years clawing her way toward independence to let that sit easy. Why do you think he helps us? Lila asked one evening, gnawing on a piece of bread. I don't know, baby. Do you think he's lonely? Maybe. I think he is. I think he's been lonely a real long time. Mara looked at her daughter, this small, perceptive creature who saw things Mara sometimes missed, and felt her chest tighten. You might be right, she said quietly. Do you think we could be his friends? I don't know if he wants friends. Everybody wants friends. They just don't always know how to ask. Mara smiled despite herself. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't pay attention. I pay attention. Not enough. Mara laughed, a real laugh, and pulled Lila into a hug. Go to bed, wise one. Can I see Ember tomorrow? If the weather holds. It will. I can feel it. Oh, you can feel it? Yeah. In my bones. Mara shook her head, still smiling, and watched Lila tuck herself into bed. Then she sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and thought about loneliness, about the ways people built walls to keep the world out, about the ways those walls sometimes kept everything out, including the things worth letting in. She thought about Colton standing in the snow, handing her money he probably couldn't afford to give, and the look on his face when he'd said he knew what it was like. And she wondered what had happened to him. What had made him choose silence over connection? What had made him build a life so carefully contained that even kindness had to be delivered in secret? She didn't have answers, but for the first time, she wanted them. 2 weeks before Christmas, the town held a gathering at the church. Mara hadn't planned to go. She'd avoided town as much as possible since the incident at the general store, but Lila had heard about it from one of the neighbor kids and had begged until Mara gave in. It's just a few hours, Lila pleaded, and there's going to be food, real food. Please, Mama? Mara couldn't say no to that, so she bundled them both up, hitched the wagon, and made the trip into town. The church was warm and crowded, filled with the smell of pine and cinnamon and the sound of people talking over each other. Mara stood near the door, feeling out of place, while Lila darted off to join the other children. She almost left, almost turned around and walked back out into the cold. But then someone called her name. Mrs. Vance! Mara turned. A woman she vaguely recognized from the general store approached, smiling in that overly bright way that meant trouble. So glad you could make it, the woman said. We were just talking about you. Mara's stomach dropped. Were you? Oh, yes. We were just saying how brave you are, trying to make it on your own out there. With a child, no less. The words were kind, but the tone wasn't. Mara heard the judgment underneath, the unspoken question. How long until you give up? We're managing, Mara said evenly. Of course you are. But, if you ever need help, there are families in town who could take Lila, just until you get back on your feet. The suggestion hit Mara like a slap. I don't need anyone to take my daughter. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant... I know what you meant. The woman's smile faltered. Around them, conversations had started to quiet, heads turning toward the commotion. Mara felt the weight of their attention, the way their eyes lingered, the way their silence screamed louder than words. She turned and walked toward the door. "Mrs. Vance, wait!" But Mara was already gone, pushing through the crowd, her face burning, her hands shaking. She found Lila near the food table and grabbed her hand. "We're leaving." "But Mama..." "Now." Lila must have heard something in her voice because she didn't argue, just followed her mother out into the cold, silent, and wide-eyed. They made it halfway to the wagon before Mara had to stop, her chest heaving, her vision blurred. "Mama?" Mara sank onto the steps of the church, her head in her hands, and let the tears come. She'd held it together for so long, held it together through everything. The failed crops, the broken fences, the endless cold, the weight of trying to be enough for a child who deserved better. But this quiet, polite condemnation from people who didn't know her, didn't know what she'd survived, didn't know what it cost to keep going, this broke something. "Mama, don't cry." Lila's small hand touched her shoulder, and Mara looked up, her face wet. "I'm okay, baby." "No, you're not. I will be." "They're mean. All of them." Mara pulled Lila close, holding her tight. "Not all of them. Most of them." Mara almost smiled. "Yeah, most of them." They sat there for a while, mother and daughter, while the sound of the gathering continued inside, warm and bright and distant. And then the door opened. Colton Hayes stepped out into the cold. He stopped when he saw them, his expression unreadable, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Then he crossed the distance and sat down on the step beside Mara, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, far enough that he wasn't crowding her. He didn't say anything, didn't ask what happened, just sat there, solid and steady, and let the silence stretch. Lila looked between them, then leaned against Colton's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. He stiffened for half a second, then relaxed, his hand coming up to rest lightly on her shoulder. And Mara felt something shift, something fragile and uncertain, but real. "Thank you," she said quietly. Colton nodded. They sat there until the cold became unbearable. Then Colton helped them into the wagon, checked the horses, and sent them home with a nod that felt like a promise. Mara didn't know what the promise was, but she held on to it all the way back, through the dark and the snow and the weight of everything she didn't know how to carry alone. And when she looked back, just once, she saw Colton still standing there, watching them go. The days after the gathering were quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Mara kept to herself, working through the cold with a kind of grim determination that left little room for anything else. She fixed what she could, ignored what she couldn't, and tried not to think about the way the town had looked at her, like she was something temporary, something that would disappear with the next hard wind. Lila, for her part, seemed unfazed. She still visited Ember every afternoon, still chattered endlessly about nothing and everything, still treated Colton like he was someone worth knowing instead of someone to avoid. And Colton kept showing up, not obviously, not in ways that demanded acknowledgement, but he was there. A shadow at the edge of Mara's vision, fixing a fence post that had started to lean, clearing snow from the path between their properties, leaving supplies without explanation. It should have annoyed her, should have felt like pity, like charity she didn't want and couldn't repay. But it didn't. It felt like something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. 3 days before Christmas, Mara was hauling water from the well when the bucket handle snapped clean off. Water spilled across the frozen ground, and Mara stood there staring at the broken handle in her hand, feeling the weight of one more thing piling onto the already impossible stack. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. She just picked up the bucket, carried it back to the house empty, and sat down on the porch steps with her head in her hands. That's where Colton found her. She didn't hear him approach, didn't realize he was there until he spoke. "Handle break?" Mara looked up. Colton stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable as always. "Yeah," she said. "I can fix it. You don't have to. I know. He held out his hand, and after a moment, Mara gave him the bucket. He turned it over, inspecting the damage, then nodded to himself. Give me an hour. Colton. But he was already walking away, bucket in hand, and Mara was left sitting on the porch with a protest she didn't have the energy to finish. She watched him disappear into his barn, then leaned back against the post and closed her eyes. An hour later, the bucket reappeared on her porch, handle repaired, reinforced with a strip of leather that looked like it would outlast the bucket itself. Mara picked it up, running her fingers over the stitching, and felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. She looked toward Colton's property, but he was nowhere to be seen. Thank you, she said to the empty air, knowing he wouldn't hear it, saying it anyway. That night, Lila was unusually quiet. She sat by the fire, playing with her wooden horse, her face serious in a way that made Mara's stomach twist. What's wrong, baby? Nothing. Lila, the girl looked up, her eyes too old for her face. Do you think we'll have to leave? Mara's breath caught. What makes you ask that? I heard the lady at the church, the one who talked to you. She said we probably wouldn't last the winter. Mara set down the pot she'd been scrubbing and crossed to where Lila sat, kneeling in front of her. We're not leaving. But what if she's... We're not leaving. I don't care what anyone says. This is our home, and we're staying. Promise? Mara took her daughter's hands, small and cold, and held them tight. I promise. Lila nodded, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. What about Mr. Hayes? What about him? If we left, he'd be alone again. Mara blinked, caught off guard. He was alone before we got here. I know, but I don't think he liked it. I think he was just used to it. That's a big difference to understand. It's not that big. Being used to something doesn't mean it's good. It just means you don't know how to change it. Mara stared at her daughter, this small, impossibly wise creature, and felt her throat tighten. You're right. I know I am. And humble, too. Lila grinned, the worry finally fading from her face, and Mara pulled her into a hug. We're staying, Mara whispered into her daughter's hair. No matter what. Christmas came cold and clear. Mara woke to sunlight streaming through the gaps in the walls, and Lila already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her wooden horse. Merry Christmas, Mama. Merry Christmas, baby. They didn't have much. A small meal Mara had saved for, a piece of peppermint stick she'd managed to buy in town, a scarf Mara had knitted from scraps of yarn she'd unraveled from an old blanket. But Lila's face lit up like she'd been given the world, and Mara felt the familiar ache of wishing she could give her daughter more. Can I go see if Ember wants to say Merry Christmas? Lila asked, already halfway to the door. After breakfast? But Mama. After. Breakfast. Lila groaned but sat back down, and they ate together in the cold morning light, quiet and content in a way that felt fragile but real. After breakfast, Lila bundled up and ran toward Colton's fence, and Mara followed more slowly, her breath misting in the air. She found Lila already at the fence, calling for Ember, but the mare wasn't in sight. Neither was Colton. Maybe they're in the barn, Lila said. Maybe we should leave them alone. It's Christmas. Nobody should be alone on Christmas. Before Mara could argue, Lila ducked under the fence and ran toward the barn. Lila! But the girl was already inside, and Mara had no choice but to follow. The barn was warm compared to the outside, filled with the smell of hay and horses and leather. Ember stood in her stall, and Colton was beside her, brushing her coat with slow, methodical strokes. He looked up when they entered, his expression guarded. Sorry, Mara said quickly. It's fine, Colton said. Lila ran to Ember's stall, her face bright. Merry Christmas, Ember! Merry Christmas, Mr. Hayes! Colton's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Merry Christmas, Lila. Did you get any presents, Bessie? No? Why not? Don't need any. Everybody needs presents. That's the whole point of Christmas. Is it? Yeah. Colton glanced at Mara and she saw something in his face. Amusement, maybe, or resignation. It was hard to tell. Well, he said, turning back to Lila, I don't have presents, but I do have something. He crossed to a corner of the barn and returned with a small wooden carving, a horse, beautifully detailed, the kind of thing that took hours to make. He held it out to Lila. The girl's eyes went wide. For me? If you want it. I want it. Mama, look! Lila held up the carving, and Mara felt her chest tighten. The work was exquisite, every line deliberate, every curve smooth. It wasn't just a carving, it was art. Colton, you didn't have to I know. It's beautiful. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise, and turned back to Ember. Lila clutched the carving to her chest like it was made of gold. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. This is the best present ever. Glad you like it. Can I name her? It's yours. Do what you want. Lila thought for a moment, then grinned. I'm going to name her Hope. Colton paused mid-stroke, his hand stilling on Ember's side. He didn't say anything, but Mara saw the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders tightened just slightly. That's a good name, he said quietly. Lila beamed and ran off to show the carving to Ember, leaving Mara and Colton standing in the barn, the silence stretching between them. Thank you, Mara said. You didn't have to do that. Wanted to. Still, it means a lot. Colton looked at her, and for a moment, Mara thought he might say something real, something that explained the careful way he kept his distance, the quiet way he kept showing up, but he just nodded and went back to brushing Ember. Mara watched him for a moment longer, then turned and called for Lila. They left the barn together, Lila chattering about hope and all the adventures they were going to have, and Mara glanced back once to see Colton standing in the doorway, watching them go. He lifted his hand in a small wave. Mara waved back, and something in her chest shifted, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably there. The rest of December passed in a blur of cold and work and small, quiet moments that Mara tucked away like treasures. Lila's laughter when she played with Hope, the way the fire crackled in the evenings, the sight of Colton working in his pasture, steady and sure. By the time January arrived, Mara had started to believe, just barely, just enough, that maybe they could make it. Maybe they could survive the winter. Maybe they could build something here that lasted. And then everything fell apart. It started with the fence. Again. Mara had been meaning to reinforce the section that bordered Colton's land, but she'd been putting it off, focusing on more urgent repairs. And now, with the weight of the snow and the freeze-thaw cycle weakening the wood, the whole section gave out overnight. She woke to find half her chickens missing and the rest scattered across Colton's property. Cursing under her breath, she bundled up and went to retrieve them, dragging Lila along because she couldn't leave her alone in the cold house. They were halfway through rounding up the chickens when Colton appeared. Your fence is down, he said. I know. This is the third time. I know. You can't keep patching it. You need to rebuild the whole section. Mara straightened, a chicken tucked under one arm, her temper flaring. You think I don't know that? I think you're putting it off. I'm putting it off because I don't have the money for new wood, or the time, or the help. So unless you're offering to fix it yourself, I don't need the commentary. The words came out harsher than she meant, sharp and defensive, and she saw Colton's jaw tighten. I've been helping, he said quietly. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. Well, maybe I should have. Maybe I should have told you to stop, because I don't need your pity, Colton. I don't need you fixing my problems because you think I can't handle them myself. The silence that followed was heavy, sharp-edged, and Mara saw the way Colton's expression shut down, the way the walls she'd watched him lower just slightly over the past months slammed back into place. Fine, he said. Handle it yourself. He turned and walked away, and Mara stood there with a chicken under her arm and her daughter staring at her with wide, accusing eyes. Mama, why did you yell at him? I didn't yell. You did, and he was just trying to help. I know, baby, Mara stopped, her throat tight. I don't know. She spent the rest of the morning rounding up the chickens and patching the fence as best she could with what she had. It wouldn't hold. She knew it wouldn't hold. But she did it anyway, stubborn and angry and hating herself for the way she'd spoken to Colton. He didn't deserve that. He'd done nothing but help her, quietly and without expectation, and she'd thrown it back in his face because she was too proud to accept it. By the time she finished, her hands were numb and her face was wet, and she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the tears she'd been holding back. That night, Lila refused to speak to her. She sat by the fire with Hope clutched in her hands, her face set in a scowl that would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Lila, I'm sorry. You should say sorry to Mr. Hayes. I will. When? Soon. That's what you always say. Mara sighed and sat down beside her daughter. You're right. I shouldn't have yelled at him. I was frustrated, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. He's been nice to us. He gave me hope. He helped you with Ember. He fixed the bucket, and you yelled at him. I know. So fix it. I will. Promise? Mara looked at her daughter, this fierce, loyal little creature, and nodded. I promise. But fixing it turned out to be harder than she thought. The next day, Colton didn't come by. Didn't leave firewood, didn't check the fence. Didn't do any of the quiet, steady things he'd been doing for weeks. He stayed on his side of the property line, and Mara stayed on hers, and the distance between them felt wider than it ever had before. Lila tried to visit Ember, but the gate was latched, and when she knocked on the barn door, Colton didn't answer. She came back to the house with tears in her eyes. He won't talk to me. Mara's chest ached. I'll fix it, baby. I promise. But days passed, and the divide only grew. Mara saw Colton once, working in the pasture, and she almost called out to him, almost crossed the distance and said the apologies she'd been rehearsing in her head for days. But pride held her back. Stupid, stubborn pride that whispered she'd been right to push back, right to protect her independence, right to keep him at arm's length before things got complicated. Except they were already complicated. She'd just been too afraid to admit it. 2 weeks into January, the town held another gathering. Mara didn't want to go, didn't want to face the stares, the whispers, the quiet judgment that followed her everywhere. But Lila had heard there would be food, and Mara couldn't say no to that, not when their own supplies were running low again. So they went. The gathering was smaller this time, held in the town hall instead of the church, and the mood was subdued. Winter had been hard on everyone, and it showed in the tired faces, the thin smiles, the way people huddled close to the fire. Mara stayed near the back, keeping Lila close, hoping to avoid attention, but attention found her anyway. Mrs. Vance? Mara turned. The same woman from the Christmas gathering approached, her smile tight and condescending. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd be too busy trying to keep that place of yours from falling apart. Mara's jaw clenched. We're managing. Are you? Because I've heard differently. I've heard your fences are down, your barn's in shambles, that you're barely scraping by. Where I stand with my land is none of your concern. Oh, but it is. We all have a stake in this town, Mrs. Vance, and when someone takes on more than they can handle, it affects all of us. Mara felt the room shift, felt the weight of eyes turning toward her, felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. I'm handling it just fine. Are you? Then where's your husband? Where's your family? Why are you out there all alone with a child, pretending you can do what takes a man to do? The words hit like a slap, and Mara felt her composure crack. I don't need a man to survive. Maybe not, but you need something, because what you're doing now isn't working. Everyone can see it. Mara looked around the room, saw the faces staring back at her, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all of them watching her struggle like it was entertainment. And then one voice cut through the silence. That's enough. Mara turned. Colton stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression hard as stone. The room went silent. He crossed to where Mara stood, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and stopped beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. You got something to say? Colton said, his voice low and dangerous. Say it to me. The woman blinked, clearly taken aback. I wasn't talking to you, Mr. Hayes. You were talking about her. That makes it my business. I don't see how. She's been out there all winter, Colton said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Working harder than any of you. Fixing fences in the cold, hauling water when the well froze, keeping a roof over her daughter's head when most of you wouldn't last a week in her place. Mr. Hayes, I don't think... And you're standing here questioning whether she can handle it, whether she's good enough, whether she belongs. The woman's face went red. I was simply concerned. No, you were judging. You've been judging her since the day she arrived because she doesn't fit into the box you think she should, because she's doing it alone, because she's a woman. Mara's breath caught, her chest tight. Colton turned to face the room, his gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. You want to talk about what it takes to survive out here? It takes grit. It takes stubborn refusal to quit when everything's stacked against you. It takes getting up every morning, knowing the day is going to be hard, and doing it anyway. He looked at Mara, and for the first time she saw something in his face that looked like pride. She's got that. More than most of you. And if you can't see it, that's your failing, not hers. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara stood frozen, her throat too tight to speak, her eyes burning. Colton held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the door. "Colton," Mara managed. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you." He nodded once, then stepped out into the cold. Mara stood there, the room still silent around her, and felt something break open inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight for years, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Lila tugged on her hand. "Mama, can we go home now?" Mara looked down at her daughter, then back at the door where Colton had disappeared. "Yeah, baby," she said quietly. "Let's go home." They caught up to him halfway down the road. Mara had grabbed Lila and run, the cold biting at her face, her breath coming in gasps. She didn't care. She had to catch him, had to say something, had to... "Colton!" He stopped and turned, his expression guarded. Mara slowed, suddenly uncertain. Lila stood beside her, quiet for once, watching. "Why did you do that?" Mara asked. "Do what?" "Stand up for me. You didn't have to." Colton looked at her for a long moment, and Mara saw something shift in his face, something raw and unguarded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." "Why?" "Because you deserved it. Because they were wrong. Because..." He stopped, his jaw working. "Because I know what it's like to be the one everyone's waiting to fail. And I'm tired of watching people tear each other down when they should be helping each other up." Mara felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry for what I said about not needing your help. I was wrong. You were scared. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it human." Mara laughed, a broken, wet sound. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Let someone help. Let someone in. I've been doing this alone for so long, I don't know how to be anything else." Colton stepped closer, close enough that she could see the snow melting in his hair, the way his breath misted in the cold. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "Not anymore." Mara looked up at him, this quiet, steady man who'd somehow become the one thing she hadn't known she needed, and felt something inside her shift. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay." Lila, who'd been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, suddenly grinned. "Does this mean we can visit Ember again?" Colton's mouth twitched. "Yeah, kid, you can visit Ember again." "Good. Because she missed me." "I'm sure she did." They walked back together, the three of them, through the cold and the dark and the snow. And for the first time in a long time, Mara didn't feel like she was walking alone. When they reached her house, Colton helped them inside, checked the fire, made sure the door latched properly. "Thank you," Mara said again. "Stop thanking me." "I can't help it." He almost smiled. "Get some rest. I'll check the fence in the morning." "Colton?" "Mara, let me help." She nodded, throat tight, and watched him walk back toward his property. Lila was already asleep by the time Mara tucked her in, clutching hope in one hand and smiling in her sleep. Mara sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and thought about the way Colton had stood beside her, the way his voice had cut through the room, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth defending. She thought about the walls they'd both built, the ways they'd both learned to survive alone, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe they didn't have to anymore. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, for the first time in months, Mara felt warm. The morning after the gathering, Colton showed up at Mara's fence line before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. She saw him from the window, already working, his breath misting in the cold air as he pulled down the damaged section of rails. She grabbed her coat and went out to meet him. "You said you'd check it," Mara said, "not rebuild the whole thing." Colton didn't look up from his work. "Can't check something that's already broken." "I can help." "I know you can, but you don't have to." Mara picked up a rail anyway and held it in place while he hammered. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm familiar now, the cold biting at their faces. "You meant what you said last night?" Mara asked eventually. "About not doing this alone?" "Yeah." I'm still figuring out what that looks like. So am I. She glanced at him, saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands moved with purpose, but not ease. He was as uncertain as she was, just better at hiding it. We'll figure it out, she said. Colton nodded, and they kept working. By the time Lila woke up and came outside, bundled in every layer she owned, the fence was nearly finished. She stood watching them for a moment, then grinned. You're not fighting anymore. We weren't fighting, Mara said. You were too. But now you're not. I like this better. Colton's mouth twitched, almost a smile, and he drove the last nail home with 3 solid strikes. There, he said. Should hold through the rest of winter. Thank you, Mara said. You already thanked me. I'll keep thanking you until I run out of reasons. Might take a while. He met her eyes, and something passed between them, something warm and tentative and real. Come on, Lila, Colton said, turning toward his barn. You can help me feed the horses. Lila's face lit up, and she ran after him without waiting for permission. Mara watched them go, Colton's long strides and Lila's quick steps, and felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, not safety, just the quiet sense that maybe, for the first time, she wasn't carrying everything alone. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Colton came by most mornings to check on things. The fence, the barn, the well. Sometimes he brought firewood. Sometimes he just stood there drinking coffee Mara had started making for him, the two of them quiet in the cold dawn light while Lila slept. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The silence between them had shifted from uncomfortable to companionable, and Mara found herself looking forward to those mornings in a way that felt dangerous. She tried not to think too hard about what it meant, tried not to notice the way her heart kicked up when she saw him walking across the yard, tried not to read into the way he lingered sometimes like he was reluctant to leave. But Lila noticed everything. Do you like Mr. Hayes? She asked one evening, her tone too casual. Mara looked up from the pot she was stirring. Of course I like him. He's been very kind to us. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Do you like him? Mara felt her face heat. Lila, because I think he likes you. You're 5, almost 6, and I'm not blind. You're also too smart for your own good. Mama? Mara sighed and set down the spoon. It's complicated, baby. Why? Because grown-up things are complicated. That's a bad answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Lila frowned, clearly unsatisfied, but she dropped it. For the moment, Mara went back to cooking, but the question sat heavy in her chest. Did she like Colton? The honest answer was yes, more than she should, more than was safe. But what terrified her wasn't the liking, it was the wanting, the quiet, growing ache of wanting something more than survival, wanting connection, wanting someone to share the weight with, wanting to stop being so damn alone all the time. And that kind of wanting came with risk, the risk of disappointment, the risk of loss, the risk of letting someone close enough to hurt her. She'd built her whole life around avoiding that risk. And now here was Colton Hayes tearing down her defenses with quiet gestures and steady presence, and she didn't know how to stop it. Wasn't sure she wanted to. 2 weeks into February, the temperature dropped so low that the well froze solid. Mara spent an hour trying to break through the ice with a pickaxe before finally giving up, her hands numb and her temper frayed. She was standing in the yard staring at the useless well when Colton appeared. Well froze? Yeah. You can use mine until it thaws. I can't keep taking from you. You're not taking. I'm offering. It's the same thing. No, it's not. Mara looked at him, frustrated and exhausted, and so damn tired of fighting every single thing. Why are you doing this? Doing what? This. Helping, showing up, acting like you actually care what happens to us. Colton's expression shifted, something guarded closing over his face. Maybe I do care. Why? Does it matter? Yes. They stared at each other, the air between them sharp and charged, and Mara saw the moment Colton decided to retreat, saw the walls go up, the distance reassert itself. Use the well, or don't, he said flatly. Your choice. He turned and walked away, and Mara stood there feeling like she'd just broken something she didn't know how to fix. Thus, she used the well. She had no choice. But the ease that had been growing between them over the past weeks disappeared, replaced by something brittle and tense. Colton still came by, still checked the fence, still left firewood. But he didn't stay, didn't linger over coffee, didn't meet her eyes when she thanked him. And Mara hated it. Hated that she'd pushed. Hated that she'd demanded answers he clearly wasn't ready to give. Hated that she'd let her own fear drive a wedge between them when things had finally started to feel solid. Lila noticed immediately. "Why is Mr. Hayes mad at you?" "He's not mad." "Yes, he is. He won't talk to me either." Mara's chest tightened. "I said something I shouldn't have. So say sorry. It's not that simple." "It is. You just don't want to." "Lila, you always tell me to apologize when I mess up, but you won't do it yourself. That's not fair." The words stung because they were true. Mara looked at her daughter, this fierce little thing who saw straight through every excuse and felt shame burn hot in her throat. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'll fix it." "When?" "Soon." "That's what you always say." "This time I mean it." But before Mara could figure out how to apologize, everything got worse. It started with a letter. Hand-delivered by a man Mara didn't recognize, his expression polite but cold. "Mrs. Vance?" "Yes." "This is for you." He handed her an envelope, tipped his hat, and left without another word. Mara opened it with shaking hands and felt the ground drop out from under her. The letter was from the county, a formal notice that her property taxes were overdue, that if she didn't pay within 30 days, the land would be seized and auctioned to cover the debt. Mara read it 3 times, the words blurring together, her mind racing. She'd known the taxes were coming, had been trying to save enough. But between the cost of supplies and the endless repairs and the sheer effort of surviving, she hadn't managed to put aside nearly enough. And now she had 30 days. 30 days to come up with money she didn't have, or lose everything. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the letter crumpled in her fist, and tried to breathe. This was it. This was the thing that would break her. Not the cold, not the town's judgment, not the endless struggle to keep the fences standing and the roof patched. This. A piece of paper with numbers she couldn't meet. "Mama?" Mara looked up. Lila stood in the doorway, her face worried. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby." "You're crying." Mara wiped her face, surprised to find it wet. "I'm fine." "You're not." "What's that paper?" "Just something from town. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it bad?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's bad." Lila crossed to her and climbed into her lap, small and warm and solid. "We'll figure it out." "I don't know how." "We always do." Mara held her daughter close and tried to believe it. That night, Mara sat at the table with a pencil and paper trying to work out the numbers. She tallied what she had saved, what she could sell, what she could possibly scrape together in 30 days. It wasn't enough, not even close. She could sell the wagon, the chickens, the few pieces of furniture she had left, but even if she sold everything, it wouldn't cover the debt. She thought about going to the bank, thought about begging for a loan, but she already knew what they'd say. She had no collateral, no husband, no guarantee she'd be able to pay them back. She was out of options. The realization settled over her like a weight, cold and final, and Mara put her head down on the table and let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd tried to build, for the home she'd fought so hard to keep, for the daughter who deserved better than a mother who couldn't make it work. She cried until there was nothing left, and then she sat up, wiped her face, and tried to figure out what came next. The next morning, she went to see Colton. She found him in the barn, repairing a saddle, and he looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. "Mara, I need to talk to you." "About what?" She held out the letter, her hand shaking slightly. "This." He took it, read it, and his jaw tightened. "When did you get this?" "Yesterday." "And you didn't say anything?" "I didn't know what to say." Colton set the letter down and looked at her, his eyes hard. "How much do you need?" "More than I have. More than I can get." "How much?" Mara told him the number, and he didn't flinch. "I can cover it," he said. "No." "Mara, no, I'm not taking your money." "Why the hell not?" Because I can't pay you back. Because I'm already in debt to you for the shingles and the firewood and everything else you've done, and I can't keep taking from you like this. You're not taking? Yes, I am. And it's killing me, Colton. It's killing me to need this much help, to be this close to losing everything and still not be able to stand on my own. Her voice broke, and she turned away, her shoulders shaking. Colton was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. You want to know why I help? He said quietly. Mara didn't answer. Because 7 years ago, I was you. I was one bad season away from losing everything, and nobody helped. Not the town, not the bank. Nobody. I lost the land, lost the house, lost everything I'd built. Mara turned to look at him, her breath caught. I started over, Colton continued. Worked for other people until I could afford this place. Built it back up piece by piece. And I swore that if I ever saw someone in the same position, I wouldn't let them go through it alone. Colton, so yeah, I help. Not because I pity you, not because I think you can't do it yourself, but because I know what it costs to do it alone. And I don't want that for you. Mara felt tears sting her eyes. I don't know how to accept this. You don't have to know how. You just have to let me. She looked at him, this quiet, steady man who'd somehow become the one thing standing between her and complete collapse, and felt something break open in her chest. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. Colton nodded, his expression softening just slightly. I'll take care of it. I'll pay you back. I don't know how, but I will. I know. He turned back to the saddle, and Mara stood there for a moment longer, trying to find words that didn't exist. Thank you, she said finally. Stop thanking me. I can't. He almost smiled. I know. Colton paid the taxes 3 days later. Mara didn't ask where he got the money, didn't ask what it cost him. She just took the receipt he handed her and tried not to cry. The land was safe. For now. But the relief was short-lived, because 2 days after that, the town held another meeting, and this time the subject was Lila. Mara didn't know about it until she showed up at the general store for supplies and overheard 2 women talking. Completely irresponsible. That child is out there in the cold, barely fed, barely supervised. I heard the mother can't even afford proper clothes for her. She's been wearing the same dress for months. Someone should step in, for the girl's sake. Mara's blood went cold. She stepped around the corner and the women went silent, their faces flushing. What did you just say? Mara asked, her voice low and dangerous. Mrs. Vance, we were just... What did you say about my daughter? The first woman lifted her chin, defiant. We're concerned, that's all. A child shouldn't be living in those conditions. What conditions? You know what we mean. The cold, the lack of proper food, the isolation. My daughter is fed, she's warm, she's loved, and she's none of your damn business. Language, Mrs. Vance, and it is our business when a child is at risk. At risk of what? Of suffering, of neglect. Mara felt rage flood through her, hot and sharp. You think I'm neglecting her? We think she'd be better off with a family who can actually provide for her. At least until you get back on your feet. The words hit like a physical blow, and Mara took a step back. You want to take my daughter. We want what's best for her. And you think that's not me. We think she deserves stability, security, things you clearly can't give her right now. Mara's vision blurred, her chest tight. She's my daughter. And we're not saying permanently, just until... No. Mrs. Vance, I said no. Mara turned and walked out of the store, her whole body shaking, and climbed onto the wagon. She made it halfway home before she had to stop, pulling the wagon to the side of the road and gripping the reins so hard her knuckles went white. They wanted to take Lila. Wanted to pull her daughter away because they didn't think Mara was good enough, strong enough, worthy enough. And the worst part was the voice in her head that whispered they might be right. What's up? She told Colton that night. She didn't mean to. Meant to keep it to herself, handle it on her own. But when he showed up with firewood and saw her sitting on the porch, her face pale and her hands shaking, he didn't leave. What happened? Nothing. Mara. She looked at him, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. Everything. The women in the store. The accusations. The threat that they might try to take Lila. Colton's expression went hard, colder than she'd ever seen it. They can't do that, he said. They can if they get enough people to agree. If they convince the county that I'm unfit. You're not unfit. Tell them that. I will. Mara shook her head. It won't matter. They've already made up their minds. Then we change their minds. How? Colton was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at her, something fierce and determined in his eyes. We show them they're wrong. We show the whole town they're wrong. And how do we do that? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Why do you keep doing this? Doing what? Fighting for us. Standing up for us. You don't owe us anything. Colton stepped closer, close enough that she could see the intensity in his face, the way his hands clenched at his sides like he was holding himself back. Maybe I don't owe you, he said quietly, but that doesn't mean I don't care what happens to you, to Lila. That doesn't mean I'm just going to stand by and let them tear you apart. Colton, you asked me why I help. This is why. Because you deserve better than what this town is giving you, and because... He stopped, his jaw tight, and Mara saw the struggle on his face, saw him wrestling with words he didn't know how to say. Because what? She whispered. He looked at her, and for a moment she thought he might actually say it, whatever it was that sat between them, unspoken and heavy. But then he stepped back, the walls going up again, and shook his head. Doesn't matter. What matters is keeping Lila safe, keeping you both safe. Mara wanted to push, wanted to demand he finish what he'd started, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt every time she thought about letting him too close. So she let it go. Okay, she said. We'll figure it out. Colton nodded, and they stood there in the cold, two people terrified of what they wanted, bound together by something neither of them knew how to name. The meeting happened 3 days later. Mara hadn't planned to go. Hadn't even known about it until Colton showed up at her door that morning, his expression grim. There's a town meeting tonight, about Lila. Mara's stomach dropped. They're actually doing this. Yeah. What do I do? You show up, you stand your ground, and you don't let them intimidate you. And if that's not enough, then I'll back you up. Colton. I'm not arguing about this, Mara. If they want to come after you, they're going to have to go through me first. Mara looked at him, this man who'd spent 7 years keeping the world at a distance, now stepping directly into the fire for her, and felt something crack wide open in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Stop thanking me. Never. That night, Mara walked into the town hall with her head high and her heart pounding. Colton was beside her, a steady presence, and Lila was at home with a neighbor Mara trusted, one of the few people who hadn't turned on her. The room was packed, more people than she'd expected, all of them turning to stare as she entered. Mara forced herself to keep walking, to take a seat near the front, to meet their eyes without flinching. The meeting started with procedural nonsense, the kind of bureaucratic talk designed to make people feel important. But Mara barely heard it. She was too focused on the way the room felt, the weight of judgment, the whispers, the way people avoided looking directly at her. And then the topic turned to Lila. We're here to discuss the well-being of the child currently in Mrs. Vance's care, the mayor said, his tone carefully neutral. There have been concerns raised about the living conditions, the lack of stability, and whether the current situation is in the child's best interest. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. Mrs. Vance, the mayor continued, would you like to respond to these concerns? Mara stood, her legs shaking, and faced the room. My daughter is healthy, she's happy, she's loved. I don't know what else you want from me. We want to know that she's safe, one of the women from the store said. That she has enough food, enough warmth, that she's not suffering because of your situation. My situation, Mara repeated, her voice sharp. You mean the fact that I'm alone, that I don't have a husband, that I'm trying to make it work without the luxury of a man to do the hard parts for me. That's not what we... Yes, it is. That's exactly what you mean. Because if I had a husband, if I had a man standing beside me, you wouldn't be questioning any of this. You'd assume he had it handled, but because it's just me, you assume I'm failing. The room shifted, uncomfortable murmurs rippling through the crowd. Mrs. Vance, the mayor said, No one is saying you're a bad mother. Then what are you saying? Silence. And then Colton stood. The room went still. He crossed to where Mara stood, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and turned to face the crowd. You want to talk about what's best for that little girl? He said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Then let's talk about it. Let's talk about the fact that her mother works harder than any of you just to keep a roof over her head, that she gets up every morning and does what needs doing, no matter how hard it is, that she's teaching her daughter what it means to fight for what you believe in, to stand your ground when the world tells you to quit. He looked around the room, his gaze hard and unflinching. You want to take that away from her? You want to tell that little girl that her mother isn't good enough? That love and grit and sheer stubborn refusal to give up don't count for anything? Mr. Hayes, someone started. I'm not finished, Colton said, his voice quiet but dangerous. You all sit here in your warm houses with your full bellies and your easy lives, and you judge someone who's doing 10 times what you'd ever have the courage to do, and you call it concern. You call it looking out for the child's best interest. He paused, letting the words sink in. But what you're really doing is punishing her for not fitting into the box you think she should, for being a woman who doesn't need a man to survive, for showing you that maybe you're not as strong as you think you are. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara stood frozen, her chest tight, her eyes burning. Colton looked at her, and she saw something raw in his face. Something that looked like pride, like respect, like something more. She's a good mother, he said quietly. Better than most. And that little girl is lucky to have her. He turned back to the room. So if you want to take Lila away, you're going to have to prove that Mara Vance is unfit, and I'd like to see you try. The mayor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Hayes, we appreciate your input, but I'm not done. The mayor blinked. If this town decides to move forward with this, Colton said, you'll be doing it over my objection and my testimony. And if you think I'm going to stand by and let you destroy a family because you're too narrow-minded to see what's right in front of you, you're wrong. He sat down, and the room erupted in whispers. Mara sank into her seat, her whole body shaking, and felt Colton's hand close over hers under the table, warm and steady and sure. The mayor called for order, and the meeting dragged on for another hour. But the energy had shifted. The certainty that had filled the room when Mara first arrived had fractured, replaced by doubt and discomfort. By the time it ended, no decision had been made. The matter was tabled for further discussion. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. And as Mara walked out into the cold night, Colton beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They didn't speak on the ride home. Didn't need to. The silence between them was full of things neither of them knew how to say. When they reached Mara's house, Colton helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, Mara said, her voice rough. I meant what I said in there. I know. All of it. Mara looked up at him, saw the intensity in his eyes, and felt her breath catch. Colton, you're not alone, Mara. Not anymore, whether you like it or not. I like it, she whispered. I'm just scared of it. So am I. They stood there in the cold, inches apart, and Mara felt the weight of everything they weren't saying pressing down on her chest. She wanted to close the distance, wanted to step into his arms and let herself fall, wanted to stop being so afraid of what it might mean. But before she could move, Colton stepped back. Get some rest, he said quietly. I'll check on you tomorrow. Then he was gone, walking back toward his property, and Mara stood alone in the dark, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She went inside, checked on Lila, already asleep, safe and warm, and sat down by the fire. And for the first time in years, she let herself imagine what it might be like to stop fighting alone, to let someone stand beside her, to build something real with someone who saw her for who she was and didn't turn away. It terrified her, but it also felt like the first honest thing she'd wanted in a long, long time. The morning after the meeting, Mara woke to find Colton already at work on her barn roof. She hadn't asked him to fix it. Hadn't even mentioned that the leak had gotten worse, but there he was, hammer in hand, moving across the worn shingles like he had every right to be there. She stood in the doorway watching him, coffee growing cold in her hands, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not gratitude. Not anymore. Something deeper than that. something that felt like belonging. "You're up early," she called. Colton glanced down, his expression neutral. "Roof won't fix itself." "I didn't ask you to fix it." "I know." Mara climbed the ladder he'd propped against the side of the barn, ignoring his protest, and settled beside him on the roof. The view from up here stretched across both their properties, the land rolling out in shades of brown and white, the sky endless and pale. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "Doing what?" "Fixing everything, showing up every time something breaks. Fighting my battles for me." Colton drove a nail home with 3 precise strikes. "Why not?" "Because it's not fair to you." "Let me worry about what's fair." "Colton, you want me to stop helping?" He looked at her directly, his eyes dark and serious. "Say the word. I'll walk away right now. Won't come back unless you ask." Mara's throat tightened. "That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with everything they'd been dancing around for months. Mara looked at this man who'd somehow become essential to her survival, who'd stood up for her when no one else would, who'd broken 7 years of silence because she and Lila had needed him to. "I want to know why," she said quietly. "Why you really help, why you care, why you stood up in front of that whole town and defended me when you could have just stayed quiet." Colton set down his hammer, his jaw working. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared out at the horizon like the answer was written somewhere in the distance. "7 years ago," he said finally, "I lost everything. I told you that part. What I didn't tell you was that I had a daughter." Mara went still. Her name was Emma. She was 4 when her mother died. Fever took her fast. One day she was fine, the next she was gone. And I was left alone with a little girl who didn't understand why her mama wasn't coming back. His voice was rough, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. "I tried. I did everything I could. Worked the land, kept the house running, took care of her. But the town, they looked at me the same way they look at you, like I wasn't enough, like a man alone with a daughter was something suspicious, something wrong." Mara felt tears sting her eyes but didn't interrupt. They started asking questions, started suggesting maybe Emma would be better off with a family, a real family. And when I lost the land, when everything fell apart, they took her. Colton said I couldn't provide for her, said she needed stability, said it was temporary just until I got back on my feet. His hands clenched on the shingles. "I never got her back." "Where is she now?" "I don't know. Family that took her moved east, didn't want me knowing where, didn't want me coming around and confusing her. Said it was better if I just let her go, let her forget." Mara's chest ached with the weight of it. "I'm so sorry. That's why I help," Colton said, looking at her now, his eyes raw. "Because when I see you fighting the same fight I fought, when I see them trying to do to Lila what they did to Emma, I can't just stand by. I won't." "You think you're saving her by saving us?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else." Mara reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused and warm. "Thank you for telling me. Doesn't change anything. It changes everything." They sat there on the roof, hands clasped, and Mara understood now why Colton had built his walls so high. Why 7 years of silence had seemed easier than connection. Why he'd kept everyone at arm's length until a stubborn woman and her fearless daughter had refused to stay away. He wasn't protecting himself from the world. He was protecting himself from the pain of losing someone again. And she was asking him to risk it anyway. "I'm scared too," she said quietly. "Of this. Of letting you in. Of needing someone and having them leave. I'm not leaving." "You can't promise that." "I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. The rest, we'll figure it out." Mara looked at him, this broken, stubborn man who'd somehow become her anchor, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Let's figure it out." Colton's expression shifted, something fierce and tender crossing his face, and he squeezed her hand once before turning back to the roof. They worked together in silence, and when Lila woke up and came outside to find them both up there, she grinned so wide it looked like it hurt. "Are you going to marry Mama?" she called up. Mara nearly fell off the roof. "Lila!" "What? I'm just asking." Colton's mouth twitched into something that was almost a smile. Get back inside before you freeze, kid. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Lila huffed, but went inside and Mara felt her face burning. I'm sorry about her, she said. Don't be. She's honest. I like that about her. She's also relentless. I like that too. Mara glanced at him, caught the warmth in his expression, and felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, not safety, just the quiet knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. 3 days later, the town held a follow-up meeting. This time, Mara was ready. She walked in with Colton beside her and Lila at home with the same trusted neighbor. The room was less crowded this time, the energy less certain. Word had spread about what Colton had said, about the way he'd defended her, and people were starting to question whether they'd been too quick to judge. The mayor called the meeting to order, and Mara stood when her name was called. Mrs. Vance, we've reviewed the concerns raised at the previous meeting. We'd like to hear from you directly about your current situation and your plans for providing for your daughter going forward. Mara took a breath and faced the room. My situation is simple, she said. I'm a mother doing everything I can to give my daughter a good life. Is it easy? No. Do I have everything figured out? No. But Lila is healthy. She's fed, she's warm, she's loved, and she's learning what it means to work for what you want, to stand up for yourself, to not give up when things get hard. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that had judged her, voices that had condemned her. You want to know if I'm fit to be her mother? Then look at her. Look at the girl who runs to help her neighbors, who treats everyone with kindness, who faces every day with hope, even when things are hard. I did that. Me. Alone. And I'm proud of it. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. But I'm not alone anymore, Mara continued, glancing at Colton. I have help now. I have support. And I have a community that's starting to remember what it means to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. She paused, letting the words sink in. So if you want to take my daughter, you're going to have to prove I'm unfit. And you can't. Because I'm not. I'm just a woman trying to survive in a world that makes it harder than it needs to be. And I'm tired of apologizing for that. She sat down, her heart pounding, and Colton's hand found hers under the table. The mayor cleared his throat. Are there any others who wish to speak? An older man in the back stood. Mara recognized him as one of the ranchers who'd been at the Christmas gathering. I'd like to say something. The mayor nodded. I've been watching Mrs. Vance since she arrived, the man said, and I've been watching how this town has treated her, and I'm ashamed. The room went quiet. We talk about community, about helping our neighbors, about doing what's right. But when a woman shows up needing help, we judge her. We question her. We make her prove she's worthy instead of just offering a hand. He looked at Mara. I'm sorry for that. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. But I'm speaking up now. That woman has more grit than most men I know. And that little girl of hers is lucky to have her. He sat down, and another person stood. Then another. One by one, people who'd been silent before found their voices. Not all of them. Not even most. But enough. Enough to shift the room. Enough to turn judgment into something that looked almost like respect. By the time the meeting ended, the matter was dismissed. No action would be taken. Lila would stay with her mother. Mara walked out into the cold night, feeling like she could finally breathe. That night, after Lila was asleep, Mara sat on her porch and watched the stars. Colton appeared a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Thought you might want this, he said, handing her one. Thank you. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they drank in comfortable silence. We did it, Mara said finally. You did it. I just backed you up. You did more than that. Maybe. Mara set down her cup and turned to face him. I need to say something. Okay. I spent the last 5 years convinced that needing someone was weakness, that asking for help meant I'd failed, that the only way to prove I was strong enough was to do everything alone. Mara, let me finish. She took a breath. You showed me I was wrong, not by telling me, but by being there, by helping without making me feel small, by standing beside me instead of in front of me. Colton's expression softened. And I'm terrified, Mara continued, because letting you in means risking getting hurt, means admitting I can't do this alone, means trusting someone with the parts of me I've kept locked away for so long. I know, but I want to try. I want to figure out what this is, what we are. I want to stop being so afraid of needing someone that I push away the one person who's shown me what it means to not be alone. Colton set down his cup and took her hands in his, rough and warm and steady. I'm scared too, he said quietly. Every day I'm scared that I'm going to lose you and Lila the way I lost Emma, that I'm going to wake up one morning and you'll be gone and I'll be back where I started. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'm not leaving by choice, and that whatever comes, we'll face it together. Colton looked at her, his eyes dark and intense, and Mara saw the war happening behind them. The fear, the hope, the desperate desire to believe. And then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was tentative at first, careful, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Mara leaned into it, her hands coming up to frame his face, and felt 7 years of walls crumble between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for months, he said. Why didn't you? Didn't know if you wanted me to. I did. I do. He kissed her again, slower this time, and Mara felt something click into place. Something that had been missing for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. They sat there on the porch until the cold became unbearable, wrapped in each other, and when Colton finally stood to leave, Mara caught his hand. Stay, she said. Mara, not like that. Just stay. I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Colton looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They went inside and Mara showed him to the chair by the fire while she checked on Lila. When she came back, Colton was still there, staring into the flames like he was trying to memorize the moment. Come here, Mara said, settling onto the worn couch and patting the space beside her. He sat, and she curled against him, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. This okay? He asked. Yeah, it's perfect. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in the firelight, and for the first time in years, neither of them had nightmares. The next morning, Lila found them still on the couch, Mara tucked against Colton's side, his hand resting protectively on her back. I knew it, Lila crowed loud enough to wake them both. Mara jerked upright, disoriented, and Colton blinked awake beside her. Lila, keep your voice down, Mara said, her face heating. But I was right. You do like each other. That's not... Are you going to get married now? Lila, because I think you should. Then Mr. Hayes can live here and we can all be a family, and I can see Ember every day and... Slow down, Colton said, his voice still rough with sleep. One thing at a time, kid. Lila bounced on her toes. But you're staying, right? Colton looked at Mara, something warm and uncertain in his expression. If your mama wants me to. She does. She told me yesterday. She said, Lila! Mara cut her off, mortified. That's enough. What? I'm just being helpful. You're being nosy. Same thing. Colton's mouth twitched, almost a smile, and he stood, stretching. I should get back, check on the horses. Will you come back for breakfast? Lila asked. Lila, he has his own. Yeah, Colton said, looking at Mara. I'll come back. Lila beamed, and Mara felt her chest warm. After Colton left, Lila climbed onto the couch beside her mother, grinning like she'd won something. I like him, she said. I know you do. Do you? Mara thought about the way Colton had held her through the night, the way he'd kissed her like she was something precious, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth fighting for. Yeah, she said softly. I do. Good, because he's not going anywhere. I can tell. How can you tell? Because he looks at you the way you look at me, like you're the most important thing in the world, and he'd do anything to keep you safe. Mara pulled her daughter close, her throat tight. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just finally noticed. Mara laughed, and they sat there together, mother and daughter, while the morning sun streamed through the gaps in the walls and the world outside slowly woke up. Spring came late that year, fighting its way through the last stubborn weeks of winter with rain and mud and tentative green shoots pushing through the frozen ground. Mara worked the land with renewed energy, Colton beside her more often than not. They rebuilt the fence properly this time, with strong posts and good wood Colton had ordered from town. They patched the barn roof together. They cleared the debris from the vegetable garden and planned what to plant. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, they built something else too. Something fragile and hopeful and real. It wasn't smooth. There were arguments about the best way to fix the well, disagreements about whether to sell some of the chickens or keep them all, moments when Mara's pride clashed with Colton's stubbornness and sparks flew. But they worked through it, learned each other's rhythms, figured out how to bend without breaking. Lila was delighted by all of it. She ran between their two properties like they'd always been one, dragging Hope the wooden horse with her, chattering to Ember about everything and nothing. One evening in early April, Mara was cooking dinner when Colton appeared in the doorway with something wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" she asked. "Open it." She unwrapped the cloth and found a beautifully carved wooden frame. Inside was a small mirror, simple but elegant, the kind of thing that belonged in a real home. "Colton? Every house needs a mirror," he said. "Figured yours could use one." Mara ran her fingers over the frame, her throat tight. "It's beautiful. So are you." She looked up, surprised, and saw the honesty in his face, the quiet certainty. "I'm a mess," she said. "You're beautiful anyway." Mara set down the mirror and crossed to him, rising on her toes to kiss him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, and they stayed like that until Lila came running in, demanding to know when dinner would be ready. Well, by May, the garden was thriving. The chickens were laying again. The barn roof held solid through 2 major storms, and Mara's savings, carefully rebuilt over the past months, were starting to look almost healthy. The town had shifted too. Not completely. Not everyone. But enough people had softened that Mara no longer felt like an outsider. The general store clerk smiled when she came in. The women at the market asked about Lila. The older rancher who'd spoken up at the meeting stopped by once to check if she needed help with anything. It wasn't acceptance, exactly. But it was close enough. One afternoon, Colton showed up with a proposition. "I've been thinking," he said. That's dangerous. Funny. Listen, I was thinking about the fence line between our properties." "What about it?" "What if we took it down?" Mara blinked. "Take it down?" "Not all of it, just the section by the barn. Make it easier for Lila to go back and forth, for us to work together." "Colton, it's just a fence, Mara, and I'm tired of it being between us." Mara looked at him. This man who'd spent 7 years building walls and was now asking to tear them down, and felt something settle in her chest. "Okay," she said. Yeah, let's take it down." They spent the next day removing the fence, post by post, rail by rail. Lila helped, dragging away the wood and chattering about all the ways this was going to make everything better. By sunset, the section was gone. Their properties flowed together, no barrier, no divide. Colton stood looking at the empty space where the fence had been, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" Mara asked. "Yeah, this is the first time in 7 years I've let anyone this close." "You regret it?" He turned to her, his eyes warm. "Not even a little." That night, they sat on Mara's porch together, watching the stars, and Colton asked the question he'd been holding for months. "What do you want, Mara, long term? What are you building here?" She thought about it. About the land she'd fought so hard to keep, about the daughter growing up strong and fearless, about the man beside her who'd become essential. "I want a home," she said finally. "Not just a house, a real home, a place where Lila can grow up safe, where I can build something that lasts, where we don't have to fight for every inch." "And me?" Colton asked quietly. "Where do I fit in that?" Mara took his hand. "Wherever you want to. As long as you want to. I want to fit everywhere. I want to be part of it, all of it. Then be part of it." "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Colton pulled her close, and they sat there in the dark. 2 people who'd learned the hard way that survival wasn't the same as living, finally ready to choose something more. In June, Colton moved most of his things to Mara's house. Not all of them. He kept the barn on his property, kept working his land. But the mornings started with coffee at Mara's table. The evenings ended with all 3 of them on the porch, Lila between them, talking about the day. It wasn't official, wasn't formal, but it was real. One night, after Lila was asleep, Mara asked him about Emma. "Do you ever think about trying to find her?" Colton was quiet for a long time. Every day. Have you tried? A few times. Hit dead ends every time. Family that took her didn't want to be found. I'm sorry. Me too. He looked at her. But I can't live in the past. Can't spend my whole life mourning what I lost. Emma's out there somewhere, and I hope she's happy. Hope she's loved. But I've got to move forward. Got to build something new. With us? If you'll have me. Mara leaned into him. We'll have you. For as long as you want to stay. Then I'm not going anywhere. By the time winter came around again, the three of them had settled into a rhythm that felt like it had always existed. Colton still worked his land, but more and more, his days were spent helping Mara with hers. They combined their resources, their labor, their plans. The town had accepted it too, stopped questioning, stopped judging, just let them be. On Christmas morning, Lila woke to find a new wooden carving on her pillow. A family of 3 horses, standing close together, carved with the same careful detail as the first one Colton had given her. She ran to show her mother, her eyes bright. Look, Mama, it's us! Mara looked at the carving, at the 3 horses standing together, and felt her throat tighten. Yeah, baby, it's us. Colton appeared in the doorway, and Lila launched herself at him. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He caught her, his expression soft. You're welcome, kid. Can I show Ember? After breakfast. Lila groaned but ran off to get dressed, and Mara crossed to where Colton stood. A family of 3, she said. That's what we are, aren't we? Yeah, I think we are. She kissed him, slow and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Colton was smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. I love you, he said. The words were quiet, tentative, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say them. Mara's chest tightened. I love you too. Yeah? Yeah. He pulled her close and they stood there in the doorway, holding each other, while Lila's excited chatter drifted from the other room and the morning sun streamed through the windows. That afternoon, the 3 of them walked to Colton's barn together. Lila ran ahead, eager to show Ember her new carving, while Colton and Mara followed more slowly. I've been thinking, Colton said. About what? About making this official. Mara's heart skipped. Official? The house, the land, us. I want to do it right. Want to make sure if something happens to me, you and Lila are taken care of. Want to make sure you're not fighting alone anymore. Colton, I'm not saying we have to rush anything. I'm just saying I want a future with you, a real one, and I want to start building it. Mara stopped walking and turned to face him. Are you asking me to marry you? Not yet, but I'm telling you I'm going to. When the time's right. When you're ready. What if I'm ready now? Colton's expression shifted, surprise and hope, and something deeper crossing his face. Are you? Mara thought about the year they'd had. The fights they'd survived, the walls they'd torn down, the family they'd built from nothing. Yeah, she said, I think I am. Colton cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her, deep and slow, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Lila's voice rang out from the barn. Are you two coming or not? They laughed and walked hand in hand to where Lila stood with Ember, showing the mare her new carving like it was the most important thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe the small moments were the important ones, the quiet mornings, the shared work, the laughter over dinner, the way 3 people who'd all been alone had found their way to each other and decided to stay. They were married in the spring, a small ceremony with just a few people from town. The older rancher stood as witness. Lila wore a new dress Mara had sewn from fabric Colton had bought in secret. And Colton wore a suit that didn't quite fit but made him look handsome anyway. The vows were simple, traditional. But when Mara said, I do, she meant it with every part of herself. And when Colton slipped the ring onto her finger, simple gold, nothing fancy, his hands were shaking. After, they had a small meal at the house. The same house Mara had arrived at a year and a half ago. Desperate and alone and convinced she could do it all herself. She'd been wrong, and she'd never been happier about being wrong. That night, after everyone had gone and Lila was asleep, Mara and Colton sat on the porch together, watching the stars. "You regret it?" Mara asked. "Marrying you? Not even close." "Good, because you're stuck with me now." "I can live with that." They sat in comfortable silence, and Mara thought about all the things she'd learned over the past year and a half. About strength and vulnerability, about pride and humility, about the difference between surviving and living. She'd spent so long trying to prove she didn't need anyone, trying to be strong enough, capable enough, independent enough. And in the process, she'd made herself small, made her world small, built walls so high she couldn't see over them. But Colton had shown her something different, that needing someone wasn't weakness, that accepting help wasn't failure, that the strongest thing you could do was let someone stand beside you and share the weight. And Lila, fierce, fearless Lila, had shown her that love didn't make you vulnerable. It made you brave. "What are you thinking about?" Colton asked. "Just how different things are now. How much has changed. You miss the way it was before?" "Not even a little." He smiled and pulled her close. "Good, because I don't either." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, and when they climbed into bed, their bed now, shared and permanent, Mara felt a peace she'd never known before. She'd found her home. Not in the land, though she loved it, not in the house, though it was hers, but in the people beside her, in the family they'd built from broken pieces and stubborn hope, and that was worth everything. 2 years later, on a bright morning in June, Mara stood in the garden watching Lila chase chickens while Colton worked on repairing the gate. The house had grown. They'd added a room, fixed the walls properly, replaced the windows. It was still humble, still simple, but it was solid now, real. The land had grown too. They'd combined their properties officially, worked them together, built something sustainable. The town had long since stopped questioning, had started treating them like any other family. And they were a family, messy and imperfect and real. Lila was 7 now, tall and quick and still asking too many questions. She still visited Ember every day, still carried hope everywhere, still believed the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. Colton had changed too, smiled more, laughed more. The walls he'd built had come down slowly, piece by piece, until what was left was just a man trying his best to be good to the people he loved. And Mara had learned what it meant to be strong without being hard, to be independent without being alone, to build a life that was worth living instead of just worth surviving. She'd learned that the things worth having were the things worth fighting for. That family wasn't about blood. That home wasn't a place. That love was choosing to stay when everything told you to run. Colton finished with the gate and crossed to where she stood, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how far we've come." "We've come pretty far." "Yeah, we have." Lila ran over, breathless and grinning. "Mama, can we ride into town today? I want to show Mrs. Patterson my new drawings." "We can do that." "Can Mr. Hayes come too?" Colton ruffled her hair. "I'm always coming with you, kid." "Where else would I be?" Lila beamed and ran off again, and Mara leaned into Colton's side. "Think she'll ever slow down?" he asked. "Not a chance." "Good. World needs more people like her." "Yeah, it does." They stood there in the garden, watching their daughter play, and Mara thought about all the nights she'd sat alone wondering if she'd make it, all the times she'd been sure she was going to fail, all the moments she'd felt like giving up. She was glad she hadn't, because on the other side of all that struggle was this: a family, a home, a life built with love and stubbornness and the quiet certainty that together they could handle whatever came next. The fence between their properties was gone now, had been for over a year. But the gate they'd kept, a marker between what was and what is. A reminder that boundaries weren't always walls, that sometimes you kept them not to keep people out, but to show them where they were welcome to come in. And their gate stayed open, always. Mara had learned a lot of things over the past few years, about survival and strength, about pride and vulnerability, about what it meant to build something real. But the most important thing she'd learned was simple. You don't have to do it alone. You were never meant to. And when you find the people who'll stand beside you, who'll fight for you, work with you, love you through the hard parts, you hold on to them. You build something together. You create a home, not just in a place, but in the space between hearts that have chosen each other. That's what family was. That's what love was. And that's what they'd built. The three of them, together. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and Lila's laughter rang across the yard, Mara smiled. She'd spent so long afraid of needing someone, so long convinced that depending on another person was weakness. But she'd been wrong. The strongest thing she'd ever done was open that gate and let someone in. And she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because the thing about walls was this: they kept you safe, but they also kept you alone. And safety without connection wasn't living, it was just existing. She'd had enough of existing. Now she was living, really living, and it was beautiful.